No one cared who I was until I put on the mask. And trust me, you'll want me to keep it on. Today, I'm going to be showing you the best decks to be climbing with on the March of the Lich King expansion, and unfortunately, the decks are very similar to the previous video, but there are some few changes as well as a few inclusions of some really sweet decks that I have actually seen on my climb and will be making videos about in the future. So let's go ahead and check out what the best decks in Standard are right now. I climbed into Legend with the same two decks, and most of those decks are going to be Miracle Rogue and, honestly, Demon Hunter. And I'm not really too happy with the fact that I honestly was playing a lot of this deck. But Miracle Rogue is definitely the best deck in the meta. It says so on HS Replay. It's the most common deck that you'll see on your way to Legend. And honestly, this deck may not have the best stats at the lower ranks, but that's just because people at the lower ranks do not know how to play this deck. This deck is like a 4 out of 5 in difficulty because it requires you in order to know what condition you need to set up and how to set it up. It's not just one of those things where, oh, I'm just going to make a big minion and hope that it works. Sometimes you have to go for 2 big minions. Sometimes you have to go for a wide board as soon as you can, depending on the matchup. With this deck, Miracle Rogue really does have its strength in playing around what the opponent wants to do, which is why this deck is so sticky and so ridiculously difficult in order to bring down, and why it's definitely the top deck on the meta right now, because this deck can work around everything to the point where it does not have any bad matchups except for like maybe one. I think Beast Hunter is the only deck that's like that puts this deck below 45%, but aside from that, its worst matchup is 45%, and the meta is completely warping around Miracle Rogue now. Casie absolutely nailed it out of the park with this list, and I think this is the best list to be playing. However, there is a conversation that is still being said that playing Burn can be very much important. Like Wicked Stabs, Tooth, and Nefarian are still very good tools in order to give you over that last hump, but some people are wondering how much is it actually needed when concoctions can give you so many different ways of winning the games. So these cards are nice and all, they're just sometimes not needed is the main point that a lot of people have come up to. And I believe if you look at the curve, this deck has a lot of 2-drops, while this deck might have a lot of 1-drops. I think, yeah, the curve is a lot cheaper than the other list, so you're able to get those bigger Sinstone Graveyard turns. And honestly, in this deck, the mulligan is very straightforward. You just want to keep the Potion Belt, you want to keep the Sinstone. You will keep Null most of the time, but some people would argue that you only keep Null when you have the Potion Belt, and you obviously want to keep your Blackwater Cutlass. This is the only cards you really want to keep, and it's just insane how consistent this deck is. But Miracle Rogue, best deck in the format. It's the reason why I am in Legend right now, because I played a lot of it, and you're going to see a lot of it on your climb as well. But if you don't like concoctions, or if you just don't want to go all in on concoctions, you still can play 30-card Thief Rogue. Unfortunately, Renathal has been booted out to the meta, like a lot of the decks that you're going to be seeing in here. There's not a lot of Renathal decks, unfortunately. But 30-card Thief Rogue is still really good if you're not wanting to play concoctions. You could argue that this deck might be a little bit better than Concoction Rogue, just because you have the potential of scamming games out of Jackpot, as well as insta-winning with like a random Colossus minion. But I mean, this deck is just not really what people want to be playing right now, in my opinion. I think people are kind of sick of the Null Maestra combination, to the point where like this is just the only deck we're ever gonna see, unfortunately, for Rogue, as long as Null and Maestra are a thing. But Thief Rogue, still a really good deck. A lot of people are having success with it. Rogue is just a really good class right now to be playing, and if you're a Rogue main, you're probably really happy with the state of Hearthstone. Other than that, some of these other classes do have ways of competing with Rogue, but just know that you have to have your deck be good against these two decks in order to meaningfully climb. And the other deck that you have to worry about in the meta is definitely this version of Spell Scythe Demon Hunter, and it's also got the quest in it. This literally has everything that you could possibly want, to the point where we're even playing Abusive Sergeant. Now, you don't have to play this Abusive Sergeant if you really don't want to. You can just put the Jason here, but I would actually argue that the Abusive Sergeant is a little bit more I mean, not just scammy, but it might be a little bit more consistent, just because you're able to create like these gigantic turns with Lady Setheno, and if you have like, you know, Sinful Brand and Fladori Warband already played, that's already like 16 damage. Wait, no, it's already 12 damage if you already fired this thing to the face. So it's not like you really need this thing in order to deal, like, you know, a crazy amount of damage because of what Abusive Sergeant can do. But I still like the idea of Abusive Sergeant in this deck more than the Jace, just because Jace is a really expensive card, and there's not a lot of situations to where, outside of playing, like, additional, like, Furies maybe, you really don't care too much about the Fel card. It's all about being able to get that Silver Moon Arcanist when you need it, to have those gigantic Fel Barrage turns with Unleash Fells. But the real power of this deck is honestly with the Sinful Brand or the Fledori Warband, and then if you combo that with Feast of Souls, just forget about it. You've automatically won the game. This deck is probably very popular to be seeing right now, and I'll probably make a video about it in the future. But just know that abusive metas are very common right now, and this is one of the decks that definitely abuses people the most consistently. However, there is one deck that straight up counters this deck, and we'll get to that here in a minute. It's not in the top 5, but it is still a deck that you will be seeing on your ladder climb. But unfortunately, people have figured out the sauce for Demon Hunter, and this is the way that people are playing it now. Next up is going to be Tempo Frost Death Knight. And honestly, there's 3 different lists that I'm going to be showcasing because people still haven't seemed to crack what the perfect 30 card list is. It's just really dependent on 1, how you want to build the deck, 2, what you're trying to counteract. So this list from Thijs is still probably one of the most consistent decks that you can make. Just 1 Rhymefang Sword, you have the Bonebreaker for maximum tempo. This is pretty much what a lot of lists have centered themselves around. However, there are some people that are trying to experiment with different 1-drops. So in this list, for example, I believe Zeddy ended up hitting Legend with this deck, but I originally just now stole this deck from Theo, who's playing on Twitch right now. So this is the deck that he's playing to Legend. Currently sitting, I think, at rank 3. But this is the list that people are trying to make with a little bit more tempo. They're trying to put in like Vicious Slither Spear. They're trying to have more proactive early turns, so that way when you have your gigantic combo, you're not going to be out of range. There's still no guild traders in this deck. There's not a lot of them that are on the ladder at the moment. But people seem to be agreeing that Bonebreaker is the weapon to be playing, and like maybe you have like a 3rd weapon. I've seen some people include the Might of Minithel as a 1-of. But most people, if they're playing this list, are playing the sword version. However, one more version that I need to show, because Ike was able to do extremely well with this version of the deck, is Ike. I'm just going to call it Ike Knight, because good lord, Ike has been playing a lot of Frost Death Knight to the point where he's actually putting in a Snowblind Harpy in this deck. And let me go ahead and explain to you the reason why this is in the deck. Adding an additional 5 life is literally like adding Renathal to your deck. That's the only reason why this is in here. Sometimes you want that additional life, and this deck does not have any ways of regaining life outside of Astalor combos. So you have the possibility of gaining about 10 life in this deck, so you have a mini Renathal in this deck while still playing 30 cards. However, let me go ahead and pull up the screenshot of Ike, who was able to reach rank 4 Legend with this deck. That's right, he was able to reach rank 4 Legend with this list. And he swears by this list after playing with a lot of Death Knight and almost sitting at 500 wins. My god, he's at 461 already. Almost twice as many as I have. But it's just like, the thing about this deck is that it has a lot of different ways of being played. You have the Guild Trader combo, so your reach is a little bit farther. It even plays this 1-drop, which I have completely underevaluated. I think I've changed my mind on this being included in some lists, not all of them. It just really depends on what kind of list you're trying to go for. And a lot of the times, this could just be a Flame Imp on turn 1. But the whole point of this deck is you play minions in the early game, you hit them in the face, you never trade. That's right, you never trade with this deck. And then suddenly you just have your burst combo ready to go. Obviously, you got to make key trades if you're going to die on the board and stuff like that. But the overall idea of this deck is that you just play minions and then you have the gigantic combo. It's just about how you're going to build up this list. And this list seems to be the most interesting. I'm not sure if it's the most consistent. If I had to put my money on a consistent list, I would have to go with this version. I don't know if it's safe. There's just a lot of people playing a lot of different Frost Death Knight decks. And it's just really funny how no one seems to be agreeing on the perfect 30 card list. So until another list comes up, I would say that just keep jamming the deck that you already like, the deck that you already been playing, because odds are it's decent. Just know that Might of Minithel might be a little bit more worth your time, because one thing I love about this deck is playing Might of Minithel on 6 in order to set up for the Frostworm Theory. It's very likely that you've killed 3 minions by turn 5, turn 6. Just don't sleep on this card. There's a lot of things that Frost Death Knight has to offer. The next deck is Shockspetter Hunter. I'm not talking about this deck. We all know how it works. The only thing I will really point out with this deck is that some people have decided to put in the Keen Eye Spotter as well as Stormpike Battle Ram. And I think the reason why I'm putting the Ram in here so that way we can have a more impactful burst combo turn with the Shockspitters. I'm not sure if this is like the most popular version of the deck, because I've seen Hat Trick play a deck that's not exactly this. Let me just go ahead and make sure that he's not playing anything that I'm not expecting. And it looks like Hat Trick's version of the deck is slightly different. Let me make sure this is actually viewable. But this version is pretty much the same idea. You have the Stormpike Battle Rams in order to give you the double value on your Shockspitter a little bit easier. You have your Keen Eye Spotter in order to get those key removal turns. I don't like this deck, which is why I'm not really like I'm not really too concerned about what the best 30-card list is. But just know that Shockspitter Hunter is still extremely good. It's still a good deck. There's not a lot of things that you can really do to prevent this deck from being good with how fast the meta is right now. And just imagine if this card was still at 2 mana. My god. Shockspitter Hunter, if you want to play it, it's definitely good. But just know that sometimes you're limited on the matchups that you'll be seeing. I'm not sure if this is the best deck to be playing against Rogue as of right now. You do have a chance, but just know that sometimes Rogue are going to do what you want to do, just way faster. Next up is Mage, and in all honesty, Mage has completely shocked me with how, like, it was completely dead before these patches, and now after the patches, we have not just 1, but 2 Mage decks that are seeing legitimate play at the top legend ranks already. So this aggro deck is probably something you've already seen. The whole point of this deck is that you play minions, you hit people in the face, and then hopefully you can play Ashwin. Ashwin is just a lot better than the Vexillus, or however you pronounce it. Like, this card just doesn't seem to be as good when literally +2 spell damage is almost like you're casting the spell a second time. So with that in mind, you can also have this minion die, and then your 1-drop becomes like your +2 spell damage, and then you can do like a double Frost Touch. You have ways of adding Arcane Bolts to your hand. So there's a lot of things that this deck can do, and it's kind of surprising like how much damage this deck can actually exert. It's really astounding what Aggro Mage can do right now. It's kind of good into Rogue because you have freeze, you have ways of being able to interact with big minions that are stealth. So this deck might be one of the best ways of being able to climb in an aggressive fashion that isn't just playing pure Paladin, which is not top 5 in my opinion, but I do have it as an honorable mention technically. But just know that Aggro Mage has gotten a lot of good matchups because a lot of the Renathal decks were giving it some issues. It just didn't have enough damage, even though I was just talking about how this deck does a lot of damage. But the issue with the Renathal decks was they could gain armor on top of that. This Mage deck doesn't like to deal with a lot of armor gains, so that's why Druid is still kind of a bad matchup, but you also have, you know, the early game tempo to kind of help out with that. So this deck is really good. If you're not interested in Aggro Mage, Big Spell Mage is actually a very legitimate deck that you can play right now, and it's kind of hilarious how Arcane Defenders is a card that technically makes Belinda less of a threat, because instead of getting a 10-10, you get an 8-8, but these Arcane Defenders definitely earn their spot in this deck, as I think the only new card outside of Astalor. Yes, this is the only new card outside of Astalor, but this deck is honestly getting a lot of spotlight now that Renathal has been nerfed, and now that scam decks are back in the front runner. The reason why this deck has emerged is because the best decks right now are aggressive or are hyper scam, and this is definitely one of those hyper scam decks that you really can't prevent from scamming the game, because Rune of the Archmage is still a powerful card no matter what people want to say. Arcane Defenders is actually a really good tool in order to give this deck some kind of like stall, but I literally went up against somebody that played Belinda on 4 into double Arcane Defenders on 5 and 6, and I was playing Rogue and I still beat them. So there are ways that this deck can definitely fall short if you don't get your good combo. I just really think that Barbaric Sorceress is a card that just does not get played around in this meta right now. If you are playing Mage and you throw down a Watch Post, people are probably more likely to do it. But honestly, I have gotten hit by Barbaric Sorceress more times than I would like to admit, even with like a coin still in hand. So just be aware of those mages that you happen to find on the ladder. But just know that Mage has made a gigantic comeback in this season, and I would not be surprised to see more people playing these archetypes. So now that I've shown you the good decks, let me go ahead and show you the fun decks. Because guess what? This deck is actually an insane amount of fun and can win against the rogues and the demon hunters of the meta. And guess what? Yes, Steam Cleaner is in this deck, and I have to show you a screenshot because this deck is like absolutely beautiful. It's a beautiful experience what this deck can accomplish. So if we go ahead and look on Twitter, we will notice that Rekvam was able to get rank 29 with this pile of 40 cards. I know I was talking about how Renathal isn't that good right now, but with Warrior, it's still pretty decent. Although I do have another Warrior deck I will be showing you that does not have Renathal. But this is the list. This is what people are actually playing. And Rekvam was able to get rank 29 with this list because it does well in order to defeat the meta decks. You have Steam Cleaner in order to beat the Soulbounds versus Demon Hunter. You have Demolition Renovator in order to destroy Sinstone Graveyard. And that's really all you need to do with this deck. That is the only thing that matters. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I ended up getting a turn 5 lethal with this deck against a Demon Hunter because I just played this when they had all 3 souls in the deck and they had no minions to actually kill me with. So, Steam Cleaner lethal on turn 5 is a very real thing, and it's hilarious to point this out. And in all honesty, this is the reason why I'm making the video right now, is because I wanted to show you guys this deck. I just don't have clips of it yet. So once I get clips, I'll be definitely making a video about it. But Control Warrior is apparently so decent. It's apparently good enough to where someone was able to reach rank 1 legend with it. Someone on the EU server was able to reach rank 1 legend with this version of regular non-Renathal control warrior, and I'm honestly very surprised, and I'm not really sure what its best matchups are supposed to be outside of out-armoring the lifesteal demon hunters and dealing with all the rogue shenanigans. I really can't speak to the validity of this deck, but rank 1 screenshots hopefully don't lie, as we see these warrior cards are still in the deck. I just really hope this is the exact same list that was being played, but somebody was able to play this warrior deck to rank 1 legend. So I would argue that, you know, if you wanna play something a little bit different, there are those opportunities right now. There are these decks that exist that have these really fun ways of being played. And once you see these other decks coming up, I think you'll agree with me that if Renathal was still in the meta, I think we'd have a completely different metagame right now. I'm gonna go ahead and get the boring Shaman deck out of the way, but you can play Evolve Shaman still to great success. This deck doesn't have anything really going for it outside of the fact that you have Goldshire Null and Evolve combos, as well as Sea Giant and Bloodlust potential for scams in case your opponent doesn't clear the board. However, there is a cooler Shaman deck. There is just a cooler Shaman deck. It's not this, it's this. It's got Bone Lord in it, man. It's got Criminal lineup, and it also has Alakir Windlord, so I think you can do the math on what exactly this deck is trying to accomplish. We've got Rockbiter weapons, we've got lots of ways of dealing damage with this deck, and this is pretty much like Evolve Shaman, but a different way of playing it. So you have like these early game spells in order to deal with the board, in order to, you know, be proactive so you're not just passing your turns, but the goal of this deck is to play Prescience on turn 4, draw the key cards to where you can play Bone Lord, play the Bone Lord, kill it off, and then have some kind of Alakir combo. And the best thing about this deck is that you can obviously set up this combo as early as turn 8, but there are different ways of being able to play this deck to where you can play Vol'jin in order to bring the Alakir out from your hand and then give it double Rockbiter for potential lethal. You have, like, honestly, Vol'jin really surprised me with how cool he was in this deck, and I have a video that I really want to make about this deck because I had so much fun playing it, and it actually did pretty decent at these ranks. That's the reason why I'm highlighting it in this video. It's not a type 5 deck, but I did see it on my way to Legend, and I did lose to this combo every now and again, and people lost to me pulling off the combo. I actually won against more rogues than I thought I would, in all honesty. So it's just really funny how a deck like this can actually work, and the fact that Bone Lord has finally found a home in a good Shaman deck makes me happy. Like, I think this is like almost like a perfect 30 card list for this sort of combo. I really don't know what we want to take out of here because we can't add any more minions. We really just want to make sure that we have the high rolls out of Farsight, hit these other spells, so that's, I guess Farsight's really irrelevant. But I really don't know what we would take out of this list, in all honesty. Like, this is just such a fun deck. So if you're looking for a fun Shaman deck, I would highly recommend this, and there's a video coming up in the future. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, make sure that video, that you're aware of when that video comes out. I gotta learn how to slow down. But guess what? I'm not slowing down, because apparently Blood Reno Death Knight is a real thing, and I'm gonna have to show the person that did this. I know it wasn't me. It wasn't me as I sloppily put together all of these screenshots that I had organized at the beginning. Wire was able to reach rank 99 with this version of the deck. He was able to reach rank 99 with this version of the deck, and it's insane that somebody put Reno in a deck and did well with it. I'm gonna go ahead and give a small clap to Wire for being the only constructive Hearthstone player that I know that is able to put Reno in their deck and hit Legend within the past year. I mean, I guess there's also Giga Chad, Bunny Hopper, Paladin, but aside from that, there are not too many people that are experimenting with Reno Death Knight. I cannot tell you what this deck is supposed to be good into outside of the typical Reno, outside of the favorable matchups for Blood Death Knight. You're supposed to be able to out-armor Miracle. You're supposed to be able to, out-life Miracle and maybe out-life some of the combo decks that are available in this meta. But I feel like without Vampiric Blood, you just really can't get there. And that's the reason why there are 2 of it in this deck. You just full mulligan for it because that effect is more important than anything, and it also gives you the potential of having insane Reno clears. I cannot speak to the validity of this deck outside of the fact that Wire hit top rank Legend with it. So just know that if you're playing this deck and you lose ranks with it, it's not on me, okay? It is definitely not on me. I am just the one who is showing you this funny deck and someone who happened to do well with it. And it's just really insane, in my opinion, that someone was able to reach top 100 Legend with this deck here. So if you're looking for a way to play Reno or to play a different form of Death Knight, this is probably going to be the most interesting Death Knight deck that you can make right now. But that pretty much does it for all the interesting decks and all of the top decks that I would recommend. You could still play Pure Paladin, you could still play Armor Druid, and you can still probably play like Curse Imblock, as well as like Boon Priest if you really wanted to. The meta has just really shifted in this direction to where if your decks cannot beat Miracle consistently, and if they can't beat the Demon Hunter decks consistently, and to a lesser extent, I think you also have to be good against Frost Death Knight. I think this is like literally the 3rd most popular deck that I went up against on my climb. But these are like the 3 decks that are ruling the meta right now, so you need to make sure that your deck can at least beat 2 out of 3 of them in order to meaningfully climb. So I hope this information was good enough for you guys to either make a decision on whether or not to play a fun deck or a meta-relevant deck, because guess what? I'm going to be playing a lot of meta-relevant Hearthstone since Hearthstone Esports is back online. As of this month, we still don't have announcements, but we do know that ladder does matter this season. So that's the reason why I'm going to be playing a lot of competitive Hearthstone. And I'm hopefully going to be able to get this Golden Death Knight by the end of this season. So if you guys like this kind of content, feel free to like this video, so feel free to subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment about what your favorite deck is right now, because I know a lot of people are having problems with finding the fun in Hearthstone right now. Just know the fun is there. Sometimes you have to sacrifice having a bad matchup against Rogue in order to actually have fun now. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this video. I'll see you for the next one.